And today I have joining us the Deputy Washington Bureau Chief for Insider. That's Dave Leventhal. Thanks for joining us, Dave.
Hey, great to be with you.
All right, now, Dave, there's been a lot going on, particularly in the media, as far as it concerns Afghanistan and really the Taliban's takeover. So can you tell us kind of where things stand right now and essentially what we possibly should be most concerned about?
Well, on one hand, we have the ending of a war that has lasted for 20 years. You may be watching this show and not remember the beginning of it. It's just gone on that long, which is why many people have referred to it as the endless war. In a way, it seemed that way not long ago. But at this inflection point on August 31st, we also have sort of the beginning of a very, very different scenario for the United States as troops leave. And we all ask, well, what happens next? Afghanistan is still there. There are still 39 million people who live in that country, despite many who have been evacuated out. There's a humanitarian crisis of significant proportions. And of course, COVID happening as well. Say nothing of the takeover of the Taliban, which 20 years ago, were we having this conversation, they would have been in charge again before we kicked them out and had a war for 20 years. So it's an incredibly confounding and confusing situation at 10, 11 days out now from the 20th anniversary of September 11th, which in a massive way was the impetus for our involvement in Afghanistan in the first place.
Wow, that definitely is a history lesson. And the thing is the question of what does the future look like? And I know with the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, they said that it's greatly increased the risk of it becoming a terrorist safe haven. So I know that's what one expert had told Insider. What's your assessment on that?
Well, going back 20 years ago, that's why we got ostensibly involved in Afghanistan in the first place, because of Al-Qaeda, because of terrorists who are being harbored in Afghanistan by the Taliban. And that's why the bombing campaigns began. That's why the military involvement by the US began. This was all under George W. Bush, which again seems like a very distant memory to many people, but nevertheless, that was what started this in motion and got us to this point. So it's a huge question right now for the Biden administration, which is, well, okay, 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, 2 years from now, what happens if ISIS suddenly takes hold in parts of Afghanistan? What if there are terrorist cells that are coming up and ultimately could potentially not just do damage in Afghanistan, but to US allies, to Americans on US soil again? And this is all going to be put in incredibly sharp relief again in just a few days when we mark the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks.
Yes, and many of us remember where we were when those attacks occurred. And I know that there is an evolving debate right now, really over the level of the threat that could potentially be posed to the United States. What are you hearing?
Well, the United States is going to be on incredibly high alert when you have anniversaries of this sort, when the entire nation is going to be marking as solemn an event as we almost possibly can get in the United States. That's an opportunity for those who would like to do harm to the United States to try to make their mark. So you can expect in cities all across the country that security is going to be unbelievable, not only in New York City, but here in Washington, D.C., and in all parts from east to west. And also too, we could definitely hear a lot of rumors and innuendos, things that are just simply not true. But through the pipeline, over the grapevine, over the internet, of course, there's going to be a lot of chatter that I would expect that we're going to hear. Much of it will just simply never come to pass, but it's going to be a tense time not only because of the anniversary, but also because of the events of the past many days as the United States leaves Afghanistan and ends its war mission in Afghanistan.
Well, that's very troubling, largely because of really what's going on right now in the background with COVID-19. Also, a lot of the dissension in our nation with people essentially rising up, not necessarily trusting the government. And we're coming out of January 6th insurrection attack on the Capitol. It just seems like it's a very tumultuous environment in which now to interject the possibility of having the Taliban or others really essentially see us as vulnerable and potentially wage some kind of attack. So in terms of being prepared for that, do you feel from what you've seen so far and from what you know that the government is ready for this?
Well, Joe Biden gave a speech, and in his speech, as we left Afghanistan, as the final soldiers left, he made the case that this was absolutely the right decision, that we should not have stayed in Afghanistan, that this war needed to end, it needed to come to some sort of military finality and be over. And we just talked about George W. Bush. It's hard sometimes to remember that this is a war that involved multiple presidents. Started with George W. Bush, was inherited by Barack Obama. Donald Trump had it for 4 years, and only now with Joe Biden are we actually leaving in a military sense. But in a way that is cold comfort as to what truly does happen next. Are we going to be safe here on US soil? Are the intelligence apparatus in the United States going to be effective enough where if there is a threat that they will be able to thwart it? And also to the question of, is the US military still going to have a role in a bombing campaign or special ops, things that are not easily and readily knowable here just in the United States unless you're deeply involved in it. So expect that Joe Biden is going to face many questions going forward as to how exactly this is all going to work, what a relationship is going to be with the Taliban. We have some interesting countries that are really trying to also assert themselves. Qatar, for example, is going to play an outsized role for such a little country. In a way, it's serving as almost a intermediary of sorts between the United States and the Taliban diplomatically. But Russia, they are absolutely going to be a huge player here. China, which borders Afghanistan and a little part in the northeast corner, they're going to try to assert themselves. Say nothing of other countries like Iran, which also borders Afghanistan as well. So we've got a number of different players who, now that this situation, as you described, is so tumultuous and unsettled, are going to also try to make sure that their names are being mentioned in the conversation as well.
Yes, it definitely seems like there will be a push to some extent for almost a world power, even if it's at least by appearances. And of course, we are not looking very strong in the United States, given the decisive, or the division, I should say. But also, let's kind of switch and look things from a different lens of those who were forced to flee. We saw during the Trump administration the push to avoid having any refugees, having anyone immigrating from a different country that was brown. So let's be real about that. And so there's a lot of right-wing fear mongering that's going on with the potential for Afghan refugees essentially building the base here. And we know that a lot of them have been evacuated from Afghanistan. So in terms of how that is really being handled, what are your thoughts?
This is going to be the biggest mass resettlement that we've experienced in many years for, in part, the reasons that you described, and in large part because of the situation itself. So we've had thousands, tens of thousands of refugees come to the United States, say nothing of other US allies as well. Here just a few miles from Washington, D.C. at Dulles Airport, planes filled with refugees coming in, and people are incredibly scared. They don't know what's going to happen next. In many cases have left a country that they've known all their lives and are here in a brand new country halfway around the world. What happens next to them? So it might be a good time to read the inscription on the Statue of Liberty and to think about how this is a nation of immigrants, and there are going to be a lot of cities all around the country that are going to hopefully welcome people who are in their most dire time of need right now, and that too is going to be just an incredibly fraught situation, with COVID, of course, being still very much the backdrop to all of this.
Absolutely, we are so much going to need our government to step up, and also we're going to need individuals to embrace, as you said, remember the inscription. That is very much a big part of essentially what America was founded upon. And so if there is something that you are looking at that you think that isn't necessarily getting the level of coverage, what would you say that is?
Local governments. We talk so much about the federal government, but what are state governments going to do? What are city governments going to do when they might have 100, 200, 500 new residents who don't speak English, who have never been to the United States, who are going to need a lot of social services? Are they going to step up in a way that goes above and beyond what the federal government is doing. My beloved hometown of Buffalo, New York, there have been many refugees who've come there, for example, and by and large, the city has tried to embrace them in every way they could. So it'll be hopefully a challenge and an opportunity for cities all across the country to do exactly that in what obviously is an incredibly dire situation.
Thank you so much, Dave, for your contribution. Where can you tell people where they can find you, please?
Absolutely, on Twitter at Dave Leventhal and certainly at businessinsider.com.
Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, thank you.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.